In the previous class, we discussed about hemolytic anemias in general. In this class, we'll discuss about two specific hemolytic anemias, namely hereditary spherocytosis and thalassemia. The objectives of this class are to understand the pathophysiology of hereditary spherocytosis and thalassemia, and to be able to list out the diagnostic features of hereditary spherocytosis and thalassemias. First, we'll be seeing what hereditary spherocytosis is like. It is a disease characterized by defect in the red cell membrane cytoskeleton, leading to the formation of round RBCs that are spherocytes. The pattern of inheritance most commonly is autosomal dominant. However, in some cases, autosomal recessive pattern of inheritance may also be seen. To understand the pathogenesis, we'll have to look into this diagram. So each RBC will have a phospholipid bilayer, and below it there will be the cytoskeleton. Using various anchoring proteins, there will be a contact between this phospholipid bilayer and the cytoskeleton. In HS, what happens is one of the proteins, that is the anchoring proteins, will be deficient, and this deficiency will lead to a decoupling of the phospholipid bilayer and the cytoskeleton. So in this image, you are seeing glycophorin C in the phospholipid bilayer and protein 4.1, which acts as the anchoring protein to bind the cytoskeleton to the glycophorin C. Next anchor that we are seeing is ankyrin, which binds band 3 of the phospholipid bilayer to the spectrin chains in the cytoskeleton. So any of these proteins, if deficient, will lead to a decoupling. Because of this decoupling, what happens is the RBC will lose its biconcave shape and will assume a more stable shape, which is that of a sphere. That is, an RBC will become a spherocyte. Now that spherocytes have formed, we need to know what the problem is with spherocytes. So firstly, the spherocytes are more rigid. Unlike the regular RBCs, which have a biconcave shape, they will not be able to bend into tiny blood vessels like capillaries. And these spherocytes, they are unable to pass from the splenic cords into the splenic sinuses, at which case what happens is they are retained in the splenic cords. Because they are retained, the local macrophages in the spleen will eat up all the RBCs, leading to extravascular hemolysis. Those spherocytes which escape from the spleen once on the second circulation will be trapped in the spleen, and they will be destroyed by the macrophages. Clinically, the patients will have mild to moderate anemia with intermittent jaundice as and when there is hemolysis. There will be enlarged spleen. Why? Because spleen is the site where these RBCs are getting hemolyzed. Then there also will be gallstones. There are two crises you need to remember in this hereditary spherocytosis. These two are also important when it comes to sickle cell anemia. There also you'll be able to see these two crises. The first is hemolytic crisis. The second one is aplastic crisis. In hemolytic crisis, what happens is whenever there is any kind of infection, the macrophages, that is the reticuloendothelial cells, they will increase in number. When macrophages increase in number, obviously those same macrophages in the spleen are the one that are eating up RBCs. So the hemolysis in the spleen that is occurring will be more. That is the hemolytic crisis. The second one is the aplastic crisis. Here what happens is one virus known as parvovirus B19. It infects the precursor cells of the RBCs present in the bone marrow. Because of that, the precursors will stop proliferating, leading to a period of anemia for a particular time, later on eventually it will recover on its own without any particular treatment. Coming to the laboratory diagnosis of hereditary spherocytosis, it's a type of hemolytic anemia, specifically an intrinsic type of hemolytic anemia wherein the type of hemolysis is extravascular. When I call hereditary spherocytosis an intrinsic type of anemia, what I mean to say is the defect is in the RBC itself. However, the hemolysis that is occurring in hereditary spherocytosis, the site is spleen, so that it is an extravascular type of hemolysis. Since it is an anemia, the level of hemoglobin will be less. So hemoglobin is low. The size of RBC has reduced here. That is why the volume also has reduced, leading to low MCV. Mean corpuscular hemoglobin is normal and mean corpuscular hemoglobin concentration is increased. Peripheral smear, when you look under the microscope, there will be numerous spherocytes. So these spherocytes are the RBCs, which are smaller than the normal RBCs, and they lack a central pallor. Since the point of view in peripheral smear is two-dimensional, you will not be able to make it out as a sphere. Instead, what you can see is there is no central pallor. Apart from spherocytes, as this hereditary spherocytosis is a hemolytic anemia, you will also be able to see some reticulocytes, also called polychromatophils. You may be able to see nucleated RBCs, and you may be able to see the presence of immature myeloid series, a few precursors of neutrophils. If a bone marrow examination is done, obviously the factory will try to compensate for the anemia, so you will be able to see increased number of RBC precursors. An important test in the diagnosis of hereditary spherocytosis is osmotic fragility test. The principle of this osmotic fragility test is that water will move from an area of lower salt concentration to an area with higher salt concentration. That is why if you immerse an RBC in a solution with low salt concentration, what happens is water will move from the solution into the RBC, leading to swelling up of RBC. At one point of concentration, what happens is too much of water will flow into the RBCs, and that is why RBCs will lyse. This phenomenon is seen in normal RBCs as well. However, the difference is that in hereditary spherocytosis, the RBCs are smaller. That is why with less amount of water flowing into them, they will start breaking up or lysing. In the lower diagram, if you see, you will notice that as compared to normal RBCs, which is the row on top, compared to the RBCs in hereditary spherocytosis, the spherocytes will undergo lysis at a much lower levels of hypotonicity. Normal RBCs will undergo hemolysis at 0.5 gram per deciliter of sodium chloride concentration, and the hemolysis is complete at 0.3 gram per deciliter of sodium chloride. However, in spherocytes, both occur at lower levels of hypotonicity. Whatever observations we draw from the test tubes, we plot it on a graph. In the graph, saline concentration is taken along the x-axis and amount of hemolysis percentage is taken in the y-axis. The blue range that you see in the middle, that is the normal range. In hereditary spherocytosis, the curve that is there is shifted to the right side of this blue range. That is why it is called shift of the curve to the right side, which implies increased osmotic fragility. These are some of the other tests that can be done to diagnose hereditary spherocytosis, namely autohemolysis test, acidified glycerol lysis time, identification of the deficient cytoskeletal protein, and finally radioimmunoassay to quantify all the various membrane proteins to see which is deficient. The second topic for today's class is thalassemia. Thalassemias are a heterogeneous group of genetic disorders with either reduced or absent globin chain synthesis. Because of this, the patient will have anemia and a relative excess of other globin chains. The pattern of inheritance for thalassemia is autosomal recessive. In a normal individual, after about age of 6 months, the most common hemoglobin is hemoglobin A, and it will have 2 alpha chains and 2 beta chains. The beta chains are coded by genes on chromosome 16, and there are 2 genes involved to produce 2 chains of beta globin. The alpha chains are coded by genes on chromosome number 11, and there are 4 genes to code 2 alpha chains. There are 2 types of thalassemia. One is called alpha thalassemia, the second is called beta thalassemia. In alpha thalassemia, there is a deficient or defective synthesis of alpha globin chain, and in beta thalassemia, there is a deficient or defective synthesis of beta globin chain. Among the 2 types of thalassemias, beta thalassemias are the one that are important for your exams. There are numerous mutations. Over 100 mutations are identified in the gene that produces beta globin chain. And the beta thalassemia disease can be classified into 3 types. The first is beta thalassemia major. Here it is either homozygous with both the genes not producing any beta globin chains, or homozygous with both the genes producing less number of beta globin chains. This is the most severe form, and survival of the patient depends on blood transfusion. The second type of beta thalassemia is beta thalassemia intermedia. This is either heterozygous with one gene producing normal amounts of beta globin chains and the other which is not at all producing beta globin chains, or it could be homozygous with both the beta globin genes producing a reduced number of beta globin chains. The disease is fairly severe, but transfusion need not be done very regularly as beta thalassemia major. The last one is beta thalassemia minor. Here one of the genes will be normal, the other will be either producing less number of beta chains, or it will be not producing any beta chains. Severity wise, this is the least severe type, and most of the times this disease will be confused with iron deficiency anemia. Coming to beta thalassemia major, which is the severest form of beta thalassemia, the synonyms for this disease are Mediterranean anemia or Cooley's anemia, and the regions where this disease is seen are Africa and Southeast Asia, including India. Clinically, the patient first starts developing symptoms after 3 to 6 months of life, which is when normally the HbA will take over from HbF. Expansion of various bones occurs, specifically the flat bones of the head, giving to some features known as chipmunk facies. There can be marked hepatosplenomegaly. The reason is liver and spleen will start taking over the job of producing RBCs. There could be iron overload due to repeated blood transfusions. There could be a growth and developmental delay because oxygen is essential for the growth of tissues. X-ray wise, there is a specific appearance known as crew-cut appearance, which implies that the bones of skull are participating in production of RBCs. This image shows that the girl in the right side having expansion of skull bones, making her resemble a chipmunk. So that is why the appearance is called chipmunk facies. In the image to your left, you can see the thickened skull bones. It is thickened because it is started to produce RBCs. The right side image shows the X-ray appearance, that is called the crew cut appearance. It is called crew cut because it resembles the haircut which is done by army people. Coming to the lab diagnosis of beta thalassemia major, hemoglobin, MCV, MCH, MCHC are all reduced. Peripheral smear wise, it resembles iron deficiency anemia report. It's a microcytic hypochromic anemia with anisopoikilocytosis, target cells, basophilic stippling and fragmented cells. WBC count is usually normal, but it may be elevated and there may be a shift to left in the myeloid series. Platelet count may be normal, but if the patient has too much splenomegaly, then platelet count may be reduced. Since this is a hemolytic anemia, bone marrow will try to push RBCs outside into the blood. That is why reticulocyte count may be increased. Serum bilirubin is elevated, specifically unconjugated bilirubin. And for confirmation of diagnosis of beta thalassemia major, hemoglobin electrophoresis may be done, which will show the absence of HbA. Here is a peripheral smear image of beta thalassemia major. The yellow arrow is pointing to a teardrop cell. The blue arrow is pointing to a nucleated RBC. The black arrow is pointing to a pencil-shaped cell. The green arrow is pointed at a microcytic hypochromic RBC, and the red arrow shows a target-shaped cell. Coming to the course of the disease, this is a transfusion-dependent anemia, which means that the patient will depend on transfusion for his life. Requires regular iron chelation because iron overload will be happening. And the treatment of choice is bone marrow transplantation. Prenatal diagnosis, that is before birth itself, diagnosis is possible by using molecular analysis. Let's talk about beta thalassemia minor. This is much more common than beta thalassemia major, and most of the times the patients are either asymptomatic or may have mild anemia. Peripheral smear will show a mild microcytic hypochromic anemia, and an important point to be noted here is that the most common type of shape variation of RBC here will be target cells. Too many number of target cells will be there. Hemoglobin electrophoresis, if you do, apart from a decrease in hemoglobin A, you'll be able to observe an increase in HbA2. HbF, that is fetal hemoglobin, could either be normal or slightly increased. In cases of beta thalassemia major, HbF levels will be too much increased. It's very important to identify this beta thalassemia minor because it is an important differential diagnosis for iron deficiency anemia, and the treatment for this is not iron supplementation. Here is a peripheral smear image of a patient with thalassemia minor, beta thalassemia minor, and you can see too many number of target shaped cells. This is what it will look like. Apart from this, microcytic hypochromic RBCs will also be there. The other type of thalassemia is alpha thalassemia. This is due to a lack of alpha globin chains. Because 4 genes are involved in the synthesis of alpha globin chains, the spectrum of the disease is a bit wider as compared to beta thalassemia. The severest form is called HB Bart's hydrops fetalis, and this is most of the times the child will be born dead here. Next is HBH disease. People will progress to adulthood, but the type of anemia they face is very severe and resembles beta thalassemia intermedia. Next is alpha thalassemia trait, which resembles beta thalassemia minor. And lastly, there is a silent carrier in whom there is no RBC abnormality. A few words on HB Bart's hydrops fetalis, which is the severest form of alpha thalassemia. Here, all 4 genes which are responsible for the production of alpha chains are found to be deleted. Because of this, instead of HbF, which has 2 alpha chains and 2 gamma chains, lack of alpha chains leads to 4 gamma globin chains. That is called HB Bart's. It has high affinity for oxygen. Most of the times this disease is detected as fetal distress in the 3rd trimester of pregnancy, and the child that is born will be born with severe pallor, generalized edema, massive hepatosplenomegaly, similar to what is seen in Rh negative pregnancies, that is erythroblastosis fetalis. Clinically, the fetus that is dead will show generalized edema and features of heart failure, along with edema in the lungs, pleural cavity, fluid in pleural cavity, and fluid in the abdominal cavity. Prenatal ultrasound, that is, if the pregnant lady undergoes ultrasound scan, it can detect this condition and it is incompatible with life. So in the image you can see a fetus having generalized edema. The second most severe form of alpha thalassemia is called the HBH disease. Here 3 out of 4 genes that code for alpha globin chains are absent. That is why there can be tetramers of excess beta chains. This again has a high affinity for oxygen. The patient affected with HBH disease will have moderate to severe anemia, and the presentation will be very similar to beta thalassemia intermedia. The other type of thalassemia is alpha thalassemia. This is due to a lack of alpha globin chains. Because 4 genes are involved in the synthesis of alpha globin chains, the spectrum of the disease is a bit wider as compared to beta thalassemia. Coming to the diagnosis of alpha thalassemia, HB Bart's hydrops fetalis. Depending on which type of alpha thalassemia, most of the times the child will be born dead. Anemia will be mild to severe. Next is HBH disease. Peripheral smear wise again microcytic hypochromic, but the anemia will be type there. Of anemia they face is target cells, very severe and resembles beta thalassemia, NRBCs, etc. Next is alpha thalassemia inclusions within the RBC beta thalassemia minors. And lastly, there is a silent carrier, brilliant crescent blue. There is no RBC abnormality. Like a golf ball. Hemoglobin electrophoresis can be used for confirmation of the disease, wherein you will get HB Bart's, HBH, HbA, HbA2 and HbF in varying proportions depending on which type of alpha thalassemia it is. This image shows some of the RBCs of alpha thalassemia patient stained with brilliant crescent blue, showing a golf ball-like appearance. To briefly summarize today's class, we discussed 2 types of hemolytic anemias today. One is hereditary spherocytosis and the second is thalassemia. Under hereditary spherocytosis, we saw the pathogenesis as to some of the proteins which are deficient, leading to alteration in the structure and why hemolysis occurs. Then we discussed about the diagnosis of hereditary spherocytosis, which involved osmotic fragility test. After the diagnosis of HS, we moved on to thalassemia and saw that there are two types. One is beta, the second is alpha thalassemia. We saw the spectrum of both types of thalassemias, alpha and beta. We discussed beta thalassemia major in detail, which is an exam question for you guys. Then we saw about alpha thalassemia, which is not so important. It is almost similar, the clinical presentation, everything. Only the hemoglobin electrophoresis findings will be different, and the addition of one extra entity, which is Hydrops fetalis. That was about today's class. In the next class, we'll discuss about sickle cell anemia and other hemolytic anemias.